Shalom, everyone. I hope you've had a restful Shabbat. We're so glad that you could join us this evening as we bring Shabbat to a close so that we can join together in a moment of grief and sadness and sitting with our feelings on this somber date of Tisha B'Av. We'll begin Havdalah with the words of La Yehudim. The Jewish people enjoy light and gladness, honor and joy. May we too experience these same blessings.
La Yehudim, Hayta Ora, Hayta Ora, Besimcha, Besason, Vikar.
Shabbat Shalom, these final moments of Shabbat. Obviously, we're going to transition into a much more somber state after Havdalah, but Havdalah, just like every other Saturday night, gives us the opportunity to try and hold on to those moments, those feelings that we had during the Shabbat. I know I can speak personally that this Shabbat, I tried to hold on to some really delicious moments that I had with each of my girls. And I hope that you can just take a moment right now and reflect back on the last 24 hours or so. Is there one moment that you can hold on to, that you can grasp and hopefully take with you, just like we do with Havdalah, trying to hold on to the light and the sounds and the smells and the taste of the Shabbat experience. So hopefully you can take that with you as we now conclude Shabbat with Havdalah.
We're going to go ahead and bring in that last light of Shabbat by lighting our beautiful Havdalah candle.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen yailai yailai la 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 yailai la 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 המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חטאותינו ימחול, זרענו וחסבנו ירבה כחול, והכוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, 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 שבוע טוב. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace, may gladness reign and joy increase. Eliyahu Anavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera veyamenu, Yavo eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Anavi, Eliyahu Atishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi.
Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov.
It's time for us to transition into a much more somber tone. The one other day of the year besides Yom Kippur that's a 24-hour fast day, a day in which, as we'll talk about in a moment, is one of deep sorrow for the Jewish people. But we didn't want to just move right into that without some kind of transition. So Cantor will guide us as we transition now into Tisha B'Av.
By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, remember thee, Zion. By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept for thee, Zion. We remember thee, remember thee, Zion. We remember thee, we remember thee, Zion.
Thank you for those of you who are joining us. There were a couple of notes. Amy, for example, pointed out that she can't fast because she's diabetic and on insulin. Yes, especially in the liberal community, we don't necessarily see this as an opportunity to fast, but it is, even if you can't fast, what we'd really like you to do for the next 24 hours, not necessarily to just sit and wallow in sorrow, but really a day of reflection, starting tonight through tomorrow night. Are there moments that you can create for yourself, for the people you love, to reflect on those moments that don't just bring us light, but those times of darkness? Now, of course, as Jews, we don't sit in that darkness, but this is the one day of the year where we give ourselves that permission to kind of just sit in it. Traditionally, Cantor and I should be actually sitting on the floor. This is something that is a tradition, just like we find if we get ready for Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur afternoon, where we read the story of Jonah, where the townspeople in Nineveh sit in sackcloth and ashes for 3 days in mourning. This is a day of national and international mourning for us as a Jewish people. So tonight we want to do a few things. If you have the opportunity to get a candle and light that candle, we want to actually do something that's the the opposite of what we usually do, right? If we think about Shabbat, if we think about what Havdalah represents, we usually see the candle as an opportunity to bring light into the world. But tonight, we're going to light candles more in the sense of Yizkor, in the sense of memorial, of memory. And at the end of our program tonight, we will blow out those candles, not as a sign that we give up hope, because we never give up hope, but really just a recognition that sometimes we need to do the reverse. Sometimes there are times where those candles do blow out and burn out, and there is darkness. And we know that personally, we know that spiritually, we know that as a nation, we know that as a world, especially this year, as we'll talk about tonight. But this is our chance to really just sit in it. And we're not going to sit in it forever, but we give ourselves permission, and we want to give you permission as well. So before we get into that, we want to just remind you of some of the history of this holiday and some of the things that are traditionally associated with Tisha B'Av. It begins all the way back, even though we don't know the exact date, with the idea of the spies returning to the land of Israel with a bad report. They go into the land and they say, as you see in this image here, carrying a phenomenal vine full of beautiful grapes, and yet they come back and they are scared, and they are fearful, and they are insecure and unwilling to recognize their own capabilities. And so a real moment of sadness for the Jewish people, which leads them to have to wander in the desert for 40 more years. And that, of course, is followed by the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians in 586, which we commemorate on this evening, as well as the second temple in the year 70, which forever changed the landscape of Jewish theology and Jewish practice after that destruction in the year 70. There's also, of course, the idea that in 1290, the expulsion of the Jews from England, they were ordered by King Edward to be expelled, and he made it clear that by November 1st of that year, all Jews had to leave the country or face execution. And so the Hebrew date on which the edict was announced was actually Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And about 2,000 Jews were exiled from England at that time. And then, of course, we know about the Spanish Inquisition in the year 1492. And on July 31st, 1492, the 9th of Av, all practicing Jews living in Spain had to make their final decision. They could either convert to Christianity or leave the country. And then if we come to more modern contemporary history, we have the year 1914, where on August 1st, again the 9th of Av, Germany declared war on Russia, which opened up the gates to the First World War, which of course affected Eastern European Jews very badly, as they were forced to flee their homes and communities because of the fighting, and it was estimated that actually close to 1 million Jewish soldiers also served in that war. And then we have in 1942 the Jews being deported, that on July 23rd, 1942, the Treblinka death camp, which was located in a forest north of Warsaw, began its operations as a death camp and continued operating all the way until October of 1943. And the Hebrew date associated with when those operations began at Treblinka, Tisha B'Av. And there are many more. There are many more examples throughout history where we as the Jewish people have had to deal with pain, expulsion, death, frustration, fear. And so Tisha B'Av is our time to mourn all of those moments in our history. And as we will get to at the end of our evening tonight, also never without losing hope. But we will spend a little bit of time tonight just reflecting not just on Jewish history and some of the moments from our own Jewish experiences, contemporary and historically, but also looking at some stories that have to do with other issues here in our country over the last year. Because every year we have this opportunity to mourn not only the things that we've gone through as a Jewish people, but also what are the things in our world that we should be mourning, the things that we hope will be ended sooner rather than later. And so I want to turn it over to the Cantor, who will talk about some of the traditional texts that we offer on this holiday.
So, as Rabbi Joel just mentioned, traditionally for Tisha B'Av, we would gather in person in the temple by candlelight, seated in low chairs, or perhaps even on the floor, to symbolize our low place of mourning. And one of the liturgical moments of Tisha B'Av is to listen to the recitation of one of our Megillot called Eicha, also known as the Book of Lamentations. And this is a writing that's attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, who firsthand witnessed the destruction of the first temple. Lamentations is broken down into 5 different chapters, and each chapter, though written by Jeremiah, is written as if it was an eyewitness account of each individual to the devastation and loss from different perspectives. As many of you know, Jewish prayer is based on music and melody. And each melody that we have is distinct and unique for Shabbat, holidays, and it's meant to set an overall mood and emotional tone for the prayer service or for the commemoration. So the recitation of Eicha is no different, and it has a unique melody that is only heard this one time during the year. So in just a few moments, I'm going to chant for you the beginning of the Book of Lamentations, but you're also going to hear throughout different cantorial colleagues of mine who are going to chant little snippets of the 4 verses. And then at the end, we're going to have an opportunity for you guys to give your own perspective and your own experience during this year and kind of write that 5th chapter for yourself. But we begin the Book of Lamentations, chapter 1.
Eicha yashva vadat ha'ir rabati am hayeta ke'almana rabati vagoyim sarati bamidyanot hayeta lamas bachotivkei balayla vedimata alcheya ela menachem mikol ohavecha koreecha bagduva hayula leoyevim קלטה יהודה מהוני ומרוב עבודה היא ישבה בגויים לא מצא מנוח קורדפיך השיגוך בין המצרים דרכי ציון אבלות מבלים באי מועד כשעריך שוממים כהניך נאנחים בתולותיך נוגות והיא מרלה.
So we want to share 4 different stories tonight, some historical and some contemporary, that we felt reflected the theme of this commemoration tonight. And so we wanted to begin with lighting one candle and to tell the story that the rabbis tell is the reason why the temple was destroyed in the first place, the second temple. Why? Why would such a thing occur? Right? Remember, the Jewish people, their entire existence, their entire spiritual purpose was structured around the temple in Jerusalem. The priests, the way in which we connected to God was there at the temple. So for it to be destroyed in the year 70 for the second time and never to be rebuilt was a moment of transformation. And the rabbis struggled with that. They wanted to understand what could lead to such trauma for the Jewish people. What could it be? Was it God's doing? Well, no. According to the rabbis, it was the relationship between 2 humans that led to that. So I want to read in a way the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. According to the rabbis in the Babylonian Talmud, the tractate Gittin talk about these two fellows, and that this relationship is what leads to the destruction of the Second Temple. They say the destruction of Jerusalem came through a Kamsa and a Bar Kamsa. A certain man had a friend named Kamsa and an enemy named Bar Kamsa. And so he once had a party, and he said to his servant, "Go and bring Kamsa." But the man went and accidentally brought Bar Kamsa to the party. And when the man who gave the party found him, he said, "See, you tell tales about me? What are you doing here? Get out of here." And said Bar Kamsa to this man, "Since I'm here, let me stay. I will pay for whatever I eat and drink." And the man said, "No." "Then let me pay for half the party," said Bar Kamsa. And the host said, "No." "Then let me pay for the whole party," said Bar Kamsa. And still the host said, "No." And he took him by the hand and he put him out of the party. And said the other, "Since the rabbis were sitting there and did not stop him, this shows that they must have agreed with this host. You know what? I'm going to go and inform on them. And I'm going to go tell the government, the foreign government, not the Jews, about what's going on here." So he went to the emperor of Rome and he said, "The Jews are rebelling against you." And so the emperor said, how am I going to know if they're actually rebelling against me? And he said, "I want you to send them an offering and see whether or not they offer it on the altar. That way you'll know." So the emperor sent with Bar Kamsa the finest calf he could find, pure in every way. But on the way, this Jewish man, Bar Kamsa, made a blemish on its upper lip of the calf, so that, according to tradition, it was no longer able to be sacrificed at the altar in the temple. And so when the rabbis saw this, they were inclined to offer it as a sacrifice in order not to offend the government. But one of the rabbis said, "Well, people are going to say that blemished animals are offered on the sacrifice. Are you willing to forego the sanctity and the purity of what we offer in the sanctuary just because of this? No, we can't do that. We can't shift rules. We can't change anything. We can't be willing to go with the flow, so to speak." So instead, they proposed to kill Bar Kamsa so that he wouldn't go back and inform back to the government. But the rabbi said, "Well, is one who makes a blemish really worthy of being killed? Like, is this really worth killing someone for?" And then another rabbi said, "Well, because of the way in which you rabbis talked about this issue, that is why the temple was destroyed." And that's the end of the story. But the story teaches us many lessons. We could spend a lot of time on this. But they're talking about this idea of sinat chinam, this idea of baseless hatred, the idea of hatred that exists between Jews for other Jews. And if we want to think about contemporary opportunities and experiences related to this, we wouldn't have any trouble thinking about ways in which Jews are going after other Jews in more ways than one. And according to the rabbis, it is this civil war, so to speak, between Jews and their philosophies and the ways in which they see the world, and their unwillingness to work together and instead to be at odds with one another, that led to the destruction of the Second Temple and therefore changed the trajectory of the Jewish people. And that baseless hatred, that senseless hatred, is something that we are still dealing with today, and something that the rabbis continue to urge us to try and overcome. With that, we will listen to the second a piece of the second chapter of Eicha.
Eicha yaif be'apo Adonai et Batzion ishlich mishamayim eretz tiferet Yisrael velo zachar hadom raglav biyom apo bilo Adonai velo chamar et kol neot מבצרי יהודה הגיע לארץ, חילל ממלכה ושריה, גדול בחור יף כל קרן ישראל, השיב אחור ימינו מפני אויב, ויבער ביעקב כאיש להבה, אכלה סלבי. דרך קשתו כאויב, ניצב ימינו כצר, ויהרוג כל מחמדי עין באוהל בציון, שפך כאש חמתו.
Our second candle tonight is for everything that we have gone through during this COVID-19 pandemic, even for myself, who are one of the COVID lucky who thankfully have had no sickness hit their life, but for everything that we've experienced in lockdown. During this pandemic, there's been no shortage of creative writing for a lot of people in the country online. And I came across this story by Nina Shapiro Pearl of Oakland, California, that I want to share with you. My memoir group had formed pretty recently, a group of 6 women, black and white, who were trying to write about our lives as we approached 60, 70, and even 80. We'd met one time in person, and then came the pandemic and orders to shelter in place. Shelter in place. It's actually a gentle phrase for such a harsh time. So much loss in the pandemic, loss of health, of loved ones, of jobs, of homes, of connection, of personal freedoms, and simple joys. Our group continued to meet every 2 weeks on Zoom, but some light had gone out for me. I couldn't see any meaning in writing my memoir with the world coming apart around me. And then George Floyd was murdered. Already the pandemic had laid bare the inequalities in health and housing, access to resources and levels of infection and illness among people of color and the poor, like Hurricane Katrina more than a decade ago. But now white people could not look away. We directly witnessed an atrocity. Protests erupted all over the country and the world. A great reckoning about America's brutal past and the inherent racist structures of power was happening all around me. I did not march as I would have normally. Fear of COVID at my age kept me on the sidelines. I did what I could, but I grew numb. I still was not writing. 2 weeks later, I received word from my friend in the memoir group, Helene, that her 40-year-old son had died suddenly the night before, and she would be leaving for Los Angeles. Now, more loss and so close. The seismic and personal losses flooded me with pain. I was lost, separated from my center, my creative voice. Suddenly, I realized that in a few days, it would be my turn to facilitate our Zoom memoir group, the first since Helene's son died, and she was planning to be on the call. I felt this was a chance to do something, to use my skills in leading groups for this exact moment. I planned my opening remarks, but no notes were needed. I said, since the last time we met, there has been such great loss on so many levels. From COVID, from the murder of George Floyd, and now the very personal tragedy of Helene of losing John, a loss that is unfathomable to us all. While our group is fairly new in the act of writing our memoirs, we already know a lot about each other's lives, but we can't really know what is happening for each of us. And in the safe place we have created, let's give everyone a chance to speak uninterrupted. And so it unfolded, 6 people all speaking, all listening, all feeling, all connecting. At the end of the 90 minutes, I brought the session to a close. I was listening so deeply that it surprised me when people thanked me for facilitating. I looked up in shock. I hadn't expected anything of the sort. Tears filled with my eyes. I had finally found something I could do. I was no longer numb. I could finally feel again after all these months. And I had found my voice. We're now going to listen to the chanting of a very special chapter of Lamentations, chapter 3, which uses a specific melody that's different than the normal chanting. And this is a melody that repeats over and over like this mantra of mourning. So this is Cantor Jackie Raffi reading the beginning of chapter 3.
עוני הגבר העוני בשבט עברתו אותי נהג ויולך חושך ולא אור אך בישוב יהפוך ידו כל היום בילה ושרי ואורי שיבר עצמותיי בנה עליי ויקף ראש ותלאה במחשכים הושיבני כמתי עולם גדר בעדי ולא אצא יכבי נחושתי גם כי אזעק ואשביה סתם תפילתי גדר דרכי בגזית נתיבותי יבא.
If we want to think about contemporary American history, I think there's definitely a reason to light a candle if we think about political divisiveness in our country. I think up until this year, I think the most contemporary version for our own country related to Tisha B'Av was 9/11. But I think we have to add another date to that list, unfortunately. And I think, though it's very different from 9/11, but yet still has really been traumatic for our country, and that I would say is January 6th, when there were people who came to our capital in an attempt to disrupt not just the election, but let's be honest, with our democracy, ways in which our capital and our sense of democracy and freedom and what we stand for in this country was really put to the test, where we had people who were so angry and so caught up in ideas and conspiracies that are not based in reality, that they were willing to put everything at risk and to take down a system, willing to climb whatever walls they needed to climb in order to disrupt the way of life in our country. I think it goes beyond politics. This is not about our former president. This is about the real framework of our country that is at risk. And this past year, we saw that put on display in terrifying ways, and I think still in terrifying ways. And so this candle is for all the ways in which our country is really grappling with destruction and really working very hard not to let it overtake us. But something we need to be very well aware of and something that we can't ignore. And as Jews, we have a responsibility to play a role in tempering that destructive behavior and to stand up for the values that our tradition holds dear. Because all I could think about on January 6th, as all those people were storming our capital, was those images of the first and second temple being destroyed, of fire destroying the very essence of a foundational system that was supposed to give us hope and comfort and guide us, not only in our own country, but to help guide the world. And this past year, I think we were faced with a moment that as Jews resonates with some of the most deeply disturbing parts of our own experience. And so this candle is for all the work we have to do in our country. We continue now with chapter 4 of Eicha.
Eicha yo'am zahar yishnei ha'kederato tishtabech namnei kodesh merosh kol chutzot b'nei Tzion haikarim hamsulaim babaz echad nichshavu naniv lecheres maaseh yedei yotzer gam tanim chaltzu sham eniku gorehen bat ami leachzar kayenim bamidbar davach leshon yonek el chiko batzamar ularim shalu lachem poreis ein lachem ha'achlim nemadanim nashamu b'chutzot ha'emunim ale dolar himchu ashpadot vayigdal avon bat ami mechadat sedom achafuka kmo ragad velo chaluva yadayim.
Our fourth candle is one that unfortunately hits so close to home, being the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, and that is the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen not just this year, but in the past couple years, and of course in the last couple weeks. We've all watched as the ugly face of anti-Semitism has shown up yet again, and this time it seems to have transformed to all Jews are responsible for the actions of a foreign government. And so this candle is for the sadness that we're still having to face this so many decades and so many years and so many millennia of persecution of our people. But the story that I want to share is a reminder that we're not alone in this fight and that we do have allies. So we light this candle in grief of anti-Semitism. So on the evening of May 18th, a pro-Palestinian mob attacked a group of diners at a sushi restaurant on La Cienega Boulevard. Video footage showed the assailants shouting racial slurs and throwing glass bottles before physically assaulting several diners, 3 of whom were young Iranian-American Jewish men. The fourth, a local photographer, was a young man who identified as an Armenian Lebanese Christian. When the Jewish Journal spoke with this sole non-Jewish victim of the attack, a 36-year-old and Los Angeles resident, who the Jewish world has been touting as a hero because he didn't just sit back and allow for this to happen because it wasn't affecting him personally, but he actually got up and defended all of the Jewish diners and his friends. When he was asked to describe the events the man who identified only as mayor for safety concerns said, "I said to the cars in Arabic, 'You want to protest? Protest peacefully. We're having dinner. We're not in a war zone.' But they didn't respond. I went closer to them and I asked them not to throw glasses. Then 2 guys jumped out of a car and ran toward me. I yelled in Arabic, 'Hey man, chill out.' One of them heard me speaking Arabic and seemed to calm down. Then I saw about 15 people coming toward me. That was not a situation that I could control by speaking Arabic. A big guy threw a bottle at me and tried to punch me, and when I saw that they were beating one of my friends on the floor, I knew I had to do something. So I grabbed a stanchion and tried to scare them away. We got my friend off the floor, but 4 of the men started beating me. When he was asked why he was compelled to fight, because I'm human and they're my friends. The way those guys approached us, throwing glasses at us, if you're in a war zone, that's a different story. But we were having dinner. We weren't harming them. Why were they kicking us in the head? I had to do something, I thought. Whatever I can do, I must do. You see, I approach people without seeing religion or color. I want peace everywhere, not only in Israel and Palestine. Every person has a family in this world and loved one who cares about them. I'm nobody in this world, but it's important that everyone know that God gave us a life to live it, and we have to love and respect each other."
So we wanted to leave the 5th chapter for all of you. Obviously, we're not together. Thank you for those of you who are adding comments to the chat, trying to be as much of a community as we can from a distance. So in a moment, we're going to put on kind of a fire image for a little bit. And want to ask you if there are certain reflections or things you're thinking about, certain things that you're mourning, certain reflections you want to share about what this holiday brings up, or the things that you think we should also be mourning on this day, for you to add those to the chat, and for those to represent the 5th chapter of Eicha, the 5th chapter of Lamentations, for us to imagine us chanting all of your reflections together in that haunting trope of the book itself, and then we'll come to the conclusion of our ritual tonight.
The Shabbat that directly comes after Tisha B'Av is called Shabbat Nachamu, Shabbat of Comfort. And there's actually 7 weeks after Tisha B'Av, which happen to lead up to the High Holy Days, that are called the Weeks of Consolation, because all of the Haftarah, because we've dealt with all of the grief in the last 3 weeks, all of the Haftarot from the prophet Isaiah are all about comfort. And so this piece of music is called Nachamu Ami, taking from the Haftarah from Shabbat Nachamu. And the interesting thing about this Haftarah is that the first command of it, Nachamu Ami, it's supposed to be God speaking to the prophet Isaiah, who represents all people, saying, you comfort my people. So even though we're sitting in the sadness tonight, the moral and the lesson behind Tisha B'Av is that we can't just sit in the sadness. That once we've addressed our feeling, once we've acknowledged that we have a problem, we have to make a change. And I think that change is spoken so clearly in Nachamu Ami, that it is up to each one of us to provide that place of comfort and security and safety and well-being for all others in our world. So this is a duet, Nachamu Ami, by the incredible composer Alana Arian. And I'm singing with a wonderful cantorial soloist in Memphis, Tennessee, Happy Hoffman.
Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem. 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 Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle to take care of one another. Comfort us in our wilderness. Comfort us as we struggle with this world. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami Yomar Elohechem.
We look for that comfort. We need that comfort. But we are going to blow out the candles because this is a 24-hour day where we think about all of those lights, unfortunately, throughout Jewish history that have been put out well before their time. And we know that there are millions upon millions throughout Jewish history who should have lived a lot longer than they did. But because they were Jews, they didn't. And we have a responsibility, to teach the next generation that we can light those lights once again, and that at least they can burn brighter and longer than those who came before us. So with that, we blow out our candles, but then we end with a prayer for peace, a peace within ourselves, peace for our country, for our world, and the hope that over the next 24 hours that you have the opportunity to reflect and find ways in which you can bring more light, more comfort into the world around us.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru amen. Ya'aseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
May the one who brings peace in the heavens bring comfort here on earth.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us tonight.
Shavua Tov, everyone.